Imagine the moment when someone in power decides your story, your family's memories, don't matter. Would you push back or stay silent? Listen closely, because what happens next will test more than the rules. It will test the courage in every corner of this community. She didn't even pause at the end of our driveway, just marched right up, phone in one hand, the HOA badge swinging on a lanyard around her neck, and her other hand gripping that familiar yellow violation slip. "This is your last warning," she said, voice clipped, eyes cold as winter glass. "Any further obstruction, and we'll proceed with fines and enforcement." The early sun hit the chrome of my pickup behind me, the same old truck my father rebuilt the year before he died. I caught the edge in her tone, a little too eager, almost rehearsed. And this time, she'd brought backup. Another board member waited near the curb, watching, silent, as if this were just another day at the office. I didn't flinch. "You're making a mistake," I replied, quieter than I felt. My fingers brushed the hood, feeling the same battered steel my father once polished every Saturday. I knew exactly which rules she'd try to bend, and what it meant if I gave an inch. Because what Patricia Randall didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the last time my dad parked that truck, his hands were shaking from the cancer that finally beat him, but he still made sure the wheels lined up perfectly with the edge of our lot. This wasn't just a battle over parking. It was a battle for the only piece of him I had left. She tried to glare me down, but I didn't move. My name's Evan Morales, and I design security systems for a living. I don't scare easy, and I don't give up ground, not when it matters. "That's not just a violation," I said, keeping my voice steady. "That truck is registered, insured, and legally parked. You want to test me, the woman with the badge? Go ahead, but you'll lose." There was a slight tremor in my hands, but it wasn't fear. It was remembering my father's promise. Never let anyone push you out of your own home. This isn't just about a rule on a page. It's about a family legacy. A father who spent his last good days rebuilding something meant to last. For a son who promised to keep it safe. The faded blue paint, the worn-out bench seat, the tiny plastic firefighter still clipped to the sun visor, they're reminders of everything we built together, and everything I refuse to let her erase. The HOA enforcer may have a badge, but I have history and grief, and a lifetime of reasons not to back down. Every step she took closer felt like a challenge to the last thing my father ever asked of me. "Take care of it, Evan. Don't let them take what's yours." Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because tonight I want to know who's ever fought for something bigger than themselves. Patricia picked the wrong driveway, the wrong family, and the wrong kind of man to make an example of. She has no idea how deep these roots go, or how much I've got to lose if I let her win. And after what happens next, the whole neighborhood will know exactly where I stand. The woman with the badge didn't waste a second. She strode right past me, phone out, snapping photos of the truck, the mailbox, even the oil stain near the curb that had probably been there since before I was born. Her backup, Mark Ellison, the HOA's newly minted compliance officer, hung back, arms folded, pretending not to hear my quiet protest. The whole thing felt rehearsed, like they'd run through this play 100 times before, each move designed to make you feel small, helpless, outnumbered. I could almost hear my father's voice. "Bullies love an audience. Don't give them the show they want." The air felt heavier as neighbors peeked through blinds, careful not to get caught watching. A dog barked down the block. Patricia finished her inspection, then started writing out the violation slip, making a show of tearing it from the pad and sticking it right onto the windshield, right over the firefighter badge I'd never removed from the dash. My jaw clenched. I wanted to rip the paper down, but I held back. If she wanted to push, I'd let her see just how stubborn Morales men could be. Hit like if you'd fight back, and subscribe to see how far I'll go to protect what matters. I turned away and saw Mrs. Ferguson, the widow from 3 houses over, standing on her porch. She offered a sympathetic half smile, her arms wrapped tight around herself. She knew what this meant. She'd had her own run-ins with the HOA enforcer over the years. First, it was her rose bushes encroaching on common property. Then, it was a flag too close to the curb. Each time, a notice appeared, and each time she grew a little quieter, a little more withdrawn. That's how the board worked, one family at a time, one violation after another, until nobody felt safe pushing back. By the time I made it to the end of the driveway, Patricia and Mark had already moved on, stopping in front of the Ramirez house. I watched as they measured a garden border with a cheap tape, muttering to each other and snapping more photos. The Ramirezes had just finished repainting their shutters for the third time in as many years, each color a failed attempt to meet the community aesthetic. Their kids watched nervously from behind a screen door, eyes wide, as if a single wrong word might get them fined too. It was clear this wasn't just about rules. It was about control. Every neighbor on this street had a story. A mailbox painted the wrong shade, a fence repaired without written approval, a family barbecue reported as an unauthorized gathering. Patricia's orange violation tags were like a warning flag. Fall in line, or you're next. I could feel the resentment simmering beneath the surface. Mrs. Ferguson's tight wave, the Ramirez's nervous glances. Even Mark, for all his posturing, looked uneasy as he scribbled notes behind the woman with the badge. Back inside, I dropped the violation slip on the kitchen table and tried to shake off the frustration. Maria, my wife, was making coffee, her face tense as she listened to my recap. "Again?" she asked, voice tired but supportive. I nodded. Same song, different verse. She offered a wry smile, then squeezed my hand. "Don't let them push you around. Your dad would never forgive you." I watched through the window as Patricia's white sedan crept down the street, pausing in front of each house, her pen moving faster than I'd ever seen. The neighborhood felt different. Smaller, colder. It wasn't always like this. When my father first moved here, Lakeshore Pines was a place where people waved from their porches. Kids rode bikes down the middle of the street, and block parties happened every summer. Now, it felt like every front yard was a potential violation. Every neighbor, a potential informant. That night, I sat on the porch and tried to figure out my next move. The crickets were loud, but the houses were quiet, curtains drawn tight. I wondered how many others were sitting just like me, angry but too tired or too scared to stand up. Maybe that's how the HOA enforcer liked it. One at a time, quiet resistance, never loud enough to matter. But she'd underestimated what that vehicle meant. I wasn't ready to fold, not after what my father built, not after the promises I'd made. And I could sense, for the first time in years, that maybe I wasn't the only one tired of backing down. The next morning, I made a point of waking up early, partly out of habit, partly because sleep had become a battle of its own. By sunrise, I was out in the driveway with a rag and bucket, scrubbing the oil stain Patricia had so carefully photographed. I didn't care if it made a difference. I just needed to do something with my hands while my mind raced. That's when I heard the soft whir of tires on pavement. Mark Ellison's silver Ford pulled up, parking awkwardly across the street from my house. I watched him sit there for a minute, fiddling with his phone, checking the rear view like a man waiting for backup. I kept scrubbing, pretending not to notice him, but every muscle in my neck was tight. Eventually, Mark stepped out, clipboard tucked under his arm, head down, eyes shaded by his cap. He crossed the street slowly, sneakers crunching on the dew-soaked grass. For a guy whose job was to enforce the rules, Mark never really looked comfortable in his own skin. I'd seen him around before, usually trailing behind the woman with the badge, nodding in agreement, never quite meeting anyone's eyes. Today he seemed even more on edge, as if he'd rather be anywhere but here. He cleared his throat, but his voice barely rose above a whisper. "Hey, Morales." His gaze flicked up for a second, then dropped to the vehicle. "Look, I wanted to, give you a heads up." He hesitated, fidgeting with his pen, his posture tight. "Patricia's planning to call for a tow. She's saying the truck violates 2 different rules, said she wants it gone by the end of the week." I studied his face, searching for any hint of malice, but what I found was something closer to regret. Mark kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting the HOA enforcer to appear out of nowhere. The hand holding his clipboard trembled just a little. I could tell he wasn't built for this, the confrontations, the threats, the small-town politics that turn neighbors into enemies. If anything, he looked a bit trapped, a man caught between a paycheck and his conscience. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, careful to keep my voice neutral. Mark's eyes darted to the ground. "Because I don't know. You deserve a chance to fight back, and..." He trailed off, the words sticking. "Look, my mom's got health problems. She lives up the street. Last year, Patricia threatened her over a wheelchair ramp, said it wasn't up to code. My mom cried for days. I tried to talk the woman with the badge down, but she wouldn't budge. His voice cracked. I know how this stuff feels. A car rolled by, and Mark stepped aside, suddenly hyper-aware of how visible we were. He lowered his voice. She told me to file the paperwork for the tow. Said it's my job, but it's not right. Not after what your dad did for this community. Not with that badge on the dash. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sun was barely up, but the neighborhood was already waking, garage doors opening, sprinklers hissing on manicured lawns, a school bus rumbling in the distance. Mark shifted his weight from foot to foot, shoulders hunched. I shouldn't even be here, he muttered. If Patricia finds out, she'll have my head. I realized then that Mark was more than just another HOA lackey. He was a conflicted witness, stuck in a no-man's land between the board's authority and his own battered sense of right and wrong. I could see it in the way his fingers drummed nervously on the clipboard, in the way he looked anywhere but at me. He wasn't a hero, but he wasn't the enemy either. He started to back away but paused. Just be ready. She's not letting this go. He gave me a half-hearted wave, then turned and hurried back to his car, shoulders stiff, head low. As he drove off, I caught a glimpse of his face in the side mirror, an expression torn between relief and dread. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun climb over the rooftops, Mark's words echoing in my mind. The battle was moving faster than I'd expected. The HOA enforcer had the board, the power, the playbook. But now, for the first time, I had something she didn't. A crack in her armor. Someone inside her camp who knew what was happening was wrong. Maria came out, wrapping her sweater tight. She looked at me, concern in her eyes. "Everything okay?" she asked. I shook my head, but for the first time, there was a hint of hope beneath the anxiety. "Not yet," I told her. "But maybe it will be." In that moment, I realized the battle lines had shifted. I wasn't just up against an HOA. I was up against a system built on fear and silence. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in wanting to see it fall. I barely had time to catch my breath after Mark walked away before a new blow landed. Just before noon, a uniformed courier stepped onto my porch, dropping a thick white envelope emblazoned with HOA letterhead through my mail slot. Final notice, impending violation. The words glared up at me, bold and cold. They threatened hefty fines and the removal of our car within 72 hours. My jaw set. This was Patricia's signature move. Tight deadlines, legalese, and enough paperwork to drown anybody who didn't know how to fight back. The house felt smaller, quieter. Eliza was at work, but her coat still hung by the door, the one she'd wrapped around me the night our world turned upside down. I reached for it, feeling the soft lining and her scent still clinging to the fabric. For a moment, I stood there, the letter in one hand, her memory in the other, and tried to steady myself. This wasn't about a car. It was about the last real piece of family we had left, and the promise I'd made to protect it. I looked out the window at the quiet street. The Society Mailbox Pavilion was framed perfectly, and I watched as neighbors came and went, each one avoiding my gaze. A couple of teenagers leaned against their bikes, casting quick glances at my house before pretending to be absorbed in their phones. The tension was everywhere, like static. Nobody brave enough to break it, everyone hoping not to become the next target. I slipped the notice into my jacket pocket and stepped outside, determined to stay calm. The sunlight was sharp, stretching my shadow across the lawn. As I crossed the lot, I passed Mrs. Ferguson. She offered a sympathetic smile, lips pressed thin, before vanishing behind her curtains. The HOA enforcer's white sedan was parked with military precision a few spaces away. Even the car seemed to glare at me. Beyond that, the HOA office loomed, more like a fortress than a community resource. Inside, Sonia was still at her post, her eyes darting from her screen to me and back again. "Back so soon, Daniel?" she said, voice clipped but not quite unfriendly. I placed the envelope on her desk. 3 days? That's barely enough time to breathe, let alone appeal, I told her, keeping my tone even. I want to know who authorized this. She tapped at her keyboard, scrolling through screens. Patricia logged the complaint. Says you were uncooperative. Says you threatened her during a compliance inspection. the board standing by her. Statement. Sonia didn't sound convinced herself, but she didn't argue. Her voice was tired, resigned, as if she'd been the messenger for 1,000 other fights. My hand curled into a fist at my side, but I didn't let my frustration show. "There are cameras all over the property," I said quietly. "Do you really believe I'd threaten anyone?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Only matters what's in the file. You need to respond by tomorrow if you want your side on record before the board meeting." I left, the weight of her indifference pressing on me. In the parking lot, a cluster of residents gathered around the notice board, heads close together, voices hushed. My presence silenced them. I wondered how many would speak up if the spotlight shifted. Back home, I fired up my laptop and started documenting everything. Photos of the car, copies of the registration, scans of every letter the woman with the badge had sent. If she wanted a legal war, I'd meet her on every front. The room filled with the rapid click of keys and the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower. I messaged Eliza a quick update. She replied with a barrage of angry emojis and one line, "Don't let them win." By late afternoon, I was walking the block again, nerves jangling, but mind focused. Near the edge of the community lot, 2 young residents debated quietly about repainting their mailbox before the next inspection. Their laughter was forced, voices low. I stopped, asked if they had ever had trouble with the HOA. One kid, barely 17, nodded. "Got fined last month for a basketball hoop." My mom almost cried. I made a note. This wasn't just about me. Patricia's machine ran on fear and silence. Every story I collected was another crack in her foundation. As evening fell, I stood under the old maple tree my father had planted decades ago. I pressed my palm to the rough bark, grounding myself. This was about dignity, not just one car or one family. I checked my phone. Board meeting, Thursday, 6 p.m. The HOA enforcer wanted a war of attrition, but I was about to give her a fight she couldn't predict. The next morning, the house felt different, a little heavier, a little more electric. I woke before sunrise, nerves sparking under my skin, knowing I was running out of time. With Eliza already at work, the place was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge and the birds waking outside. I made coffee, the bitterness grounding me as I flipped through the growing pile of evidence on the table. Photos, letters, and every warning notice, each one more outrageous than the last. But none of it felt like enough. The HOA enforcer's accusations were all smoke and mirrors, and I knew she'd stack the deck at the board meeting. I needed something undeniable, a crack in their armor, not just my word against hers. As I sipped my coffee, my eyes landed on the security system display by the back door. An idea sparked. I'd installed the cameras last month, partly for peace of mind, partly because of all the inspections that seemed to happen when no one was looking. I scrolled through the footage on my phone, hoping I'd find more than just Patricia's white sedan lurking near the curb. I fast-forwarded to the morning she tried the master key. My stomach tightened as I watched the video. The woman with the badge, clipboard in hand, striding up the drive with Mark's golf cart parked a few feet away. She barely glanced at the camera, her confidence almost smug. Then I saw it, clear as day. The HOA enforcer slipping a key into the car's lock, Mark standing back, arms folded, watching but not intervening. No announcement, no attempt to make contact, just straight to the lock like she owned the place. But what stopped me cold wasn't the HOA enforcer's boldness. It was the look on Mark's face. The camera angle caught him glancing around, jaw clenched, his hands fidgeting with the radio on his belt. He wasn't just following orders. He was clearly uncomfortable, maybe even scared. And when Patricia pulled out her phone and started dialing, Mark took a half step forward, hesitated, then stepped back, as if torn between duty and conscience. I rewound the footage and played it again, this time with the sound up. Her voice was cold and rehearsed. "Homeowner is threatening me. He's blocking an official inspection. The vehicle looks abandoned, but my own voice, captured in the background, was calm, low, and direct. You know this isn't just any car. It's registered, insured, and you're trespassing." That was it. Proof, not just of the HOA enforcer's actions, but of Mark's inner conflict, caught on tape, unable to intervene, unwilling to support her lie. For the first time since this all started, I felt the ground shift beneath me. This was no longer a he said, she said battle. This was evidence, a clear record that could stand up to any challenge, whether in a board meeting or a courtroom. I emailed the footage to myself and backed it up to the cloud, just in case. Then I did something I'd never done before. I drafted a short, clear tip and submitted it through the local police department's online portal. Possible illegal entry and false report by HOA official, video attached. I listed timestamps, described the context, and made sure nothing could be ignored. As soon as I hit send, a weight lifted. The HOA enforcer had always counted on silence, on people not knowing their rights, on no one watching. But I just made it impossible for her to hide what she'd done. With the security footage now in play, I began to map out my next moves. I made copies for Eliza, for my attorney friend, and for the board itself. If the meeting was going to become a showdown, I was ready to play my strongest card in front of everyone. The day crawled by in a haze of adrenaline, but this time, every second felt like progress. The woman with the badge grip on the narrative was breaking. Reed's hesitation had become my breakthrough, and I was determined not to waste it. The sun was sharp and relentless by noon, making every crack in the driveway shine. I stepped outside, clutching the folder of evidence and the flash drive with the security footage, my mind cycling through every possible scenario. Her warning letter was still taped to my door, orange, bold, and threatening. I tore it down without a second thought and tossed it in the trash. This time, I wasn't going to let intimidation work. Maria called on her lunch break, her voice soft but insistent. "You're ready for this, Daniel. Don't let them spin it. Stick to what matters." I heard the worry underneath, the weight she carried every time the HOA sent another notice. I promised her I'd stay calm, but inside, the adrenaline was mixing with something older and deeper, a resolve that went all the way back to my dad, the man who'd taught me to battle for what was right, not just what was easy. I walked the block, feeling the eyes behind blinds, the tension in every front yard. Lakeshore Pines looked as ordinary as ever, but everything had changed. The old pickup in my driveway wasn't just a vehicle anymore. It was a symbol. Every time I glanced at it, I remembered my father's hands, scarred from years on the fire crew, rebuilding that truck one bolt at a time after his diagnosis. It was his way of leaving something behind, a silent promise that family mattered more than any rule or regulation. As I passed Mrs. Ferguson's house, she peeked out and gave a small, nervous wave. "Hang in there, Daniel," she called, voice trembling. "We're rooting for you." I thanked her, wishing I could bottle that encouragement and take it with me to the board meeting. A few houses down, Mark's car was parked at the curb, empty, but his porch light was on, even in the daytime. I wondered if he was home, pacing the way I was, feeling the pressure build. He'd been quiet since that morning, no texts, no calls. The video had exposed his struggle as much as the HOA enforcer's lies, and I wasn't sure if he'd stand by me or keep his head down. I returned home and spread everything across the kitchen table. Warning letters, screenshots of the footage, a timeline of events, every piece of evidence in neat rows. My fingers shook a little as I arranged the stack, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was focus. I rehearsed what I'd say, running over every detail, every moment when Patricia had crossed a line. I practiced keeping my voice steady, my arguments clean. I thought about what would matter to the board, the rules, sure, but also the story of a community that had forgotten what it meant to stand together. By late afternoon, an email pinged into my inbox from Sonia, the HOA manager. "Board meeting will convene at 7 p.m. tonight. Vehicle warning and conduct complaint to be addressed. Bring all documentation." It was the invitation I'd been waiting for, official and ominous. I replied simply, "I'll be there, with evidence." I took a breath, staring at the flash drive. The discovery I'd made was more than just a lucky break. It was a turning point. No one could claim ignorance now. The security footage proved Patricia's misconduct, but it also showed the board that the days of unchecked power were over. For the first time, it felt like the odds were shifting, not just for me, but for everyone who'd ever been cornered by an HOA that went too far. I packed my folder, double-checked the drive, and slipped on my jacket. As the sun dropped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, I paused at the Chevy and ran my hand along its side. "We're not backing down," I whispered, just loud enough for me, and maybe my dad, to hear. The time for fear was over. Now it was about courage. The story was no longer just about me or a violation notice. It was about reclaiming something precious for my family, and maybe for everyone who called this place home. By the time I reached the clubhouse, the air was thick with the buzz of low conversations and shifting feet. The sun was dipping below the rooftops, painting the parking lot in long stripes of gold and shadow. I kept my eyes forward, folder tucked under my arm, every sense on high alert. My mind kept replaying Mark's nervous posture, the hesitance in his voice the last time we spoke. I didn't know if he'd show, or if the pressure would finally push him to vanish like so many before. Inside, the boardroom was already filling up. Neighbors crowded into folding chairs along the walls, a nervous energy vibrating through the room. Maria squeezed my hand as I took a seat near the front. Patricia sat across the table, jaw set, her fingers drumming against her clipboard like she was counting down to a battle. Sonia called the meeting to order. Her voice clipped, but I barely heard her. My focus narrowed, scanning for Mark. A rustle near the door caught my attention. He slipped in, eyes darting around, shoulders hunched, a man at war with himself. He hovered at the back, then slowly made his way up the aisle. When he passed my row, our eyes met. He didn't nod, just gave me the smallest look, something that felt like a promise and a plea all at once. She started her monologue, painting me as a dangerous agitator, waving violation letters in the air for everyone to see. I listened, letting her words wash over me. It was the same playbook as always: fear, threat, control. But this time, there was another voice waiting in the wings. When Sonia opened the floor for testimony, Mark hesitated. I could see his fists clenched, jaw working as he stared at the floor. Finally, as the women reached for yet another warning letter, he stood up. The room fell silent. For a moment, it seemed like even the air stopped moving. "I was there that morning," he began, voice thin but growing stronger with every word. "I saw what happened. Daniel never threatened anyone. He stayed back, asked for the rules to be followed." His eyes flicked to the woman with the badge, then back to me. "Patricia told me not to get involved. She said she'd handle it, and that if I questioned anything, I'd be looking for a new job." The room shifted, a ripple of unease passing through the crowd. Mark's hands trembled, but his voice didn't crack. This isn't the first time lines have been crossed. But this time, I couldn't let it go. That vehicle, it means something to him, to this neighborhood. We're supposed to look out for each other, not tear each other down. He let out a shaky breath, as if shedding months of guilt. "I'm willing to make a statement. I'll back up what I saw." She tried to interrupt, her voice tight, but Sonia lifted a hand, surprising everyone. "Let him finish." He looked at me again, eyes tired but sure. "I just want to do the right thing." The hush that settled over the room felt almost electric, thicker than any shouted debate. With a long exhale, Mark eased into his seat, the burden he'd carried for months finally lifting from his frame. Across the table, the board shifted uncomfortably, side eyes and furrowed brows betraying their surprise. Even Patricia's polished mask wavered, her authority rattled in the wake of truth spoken out loud. A few neighbors murmured approval, the tension in the room slowly breaking. Maria squeezed my hand tighter, her eyes shining with something close to relief. For the first time, the board had to confront the reality they'd tried to ignore. One of their own had refused to stay silent. The meeting pressed on, but a quiet shift lingered in the air, a sense that old certainties had just crumbled. The statement from the back of the room rippled through every conversation, casting a new light on my evidence and changing the board's calculations. What mattered most wasn't the paper or the proof. It was the moment someone chose principle over comfort, reshaping the room's energy. No longer just a bystander, the quiet man at the end of the aisle had shown how a single act of bravery could ignite a groundswell. A subtle current lingered in the room, that electric charge left by a truth spoken at last. The proceedings slipped into the background, motions passed, rules recited, voices rising and falling in a dull rhythm, none of it able to dispel the shift that had just occurred. Throughout it all, hushed conversations drifted through the crowd, cautious glances searching for signs that the tide had truly turned. Only when the last voices faded and the aisles cleared did I slip outside, evidence gripped tightly, ready to face the changed night. Maria met me on the sidewalk, her eyes searching mine for a sign that we'd finally turned the tide. That was it, Daniel, she whispered. You have what you need. Don't let, them spin this, I nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and purpose settle into my bones. I'd spent weeks gathering evidence, security footage, photos, violation letters, and Mark's testimony was the linchpin. Now, I needed to craft a plan so tight, even the board's best lawyer couldn't find a seam. At home, I cleared the kitchen table, spreading out every document in careful order. Time-stamped video stills, my father's registration, his written statement, and copies of every warning and demand the HOA enforcer had issued. Maria hovered nearby, helping me sort the files, her calm efficiency a grounding force. We can't let them control the narrative, she said. You have to show how this has affected everyone, not just us. That night, I drafted a summary timeline, connecting the dots between Patricia's escalating harassment and the wider pattern of abuse in the neighborhood. For every warning sticker slapped on my door, there was a neighbor with a similar story. I reached out to Mrs. Ferguson, the couple with the wheelchair ramp, and even the kid fined for his soccer net, asking for their support. Within hours, my phone filled with messages, copies of warning letters, snapshots of orange tags, and personal statements about the fear and intimidation they'd endured. The next morning, I created a digital evidence binder, a single file containing everything: my documents, Mark's confession, neighbors' stories, and security footage highlights. I made 3 copies, one for myself, one for Maria, and one for the city inspector's office. This wasn't just about winning a single meeting anymore. It was about exposing a pattern and forcing the board to answer for it in front of witnesses and authority figures. Maria double-checked the file, her eyes fierce and focused. This is bulletproof, Daniel. You've done everything by the book. The law's on your side. I felt a surge of gratitude, knowing how much she'd held together while I waged this fight. Just make sure you're the one telling the story, she added. Don't let them talk over you at the next meeting. By noon, I'd arranged a small meeting in the society park. I wanted a place where neighbors could speak freely, away from the stifling walls of the HOA office. Mrs. Ferguson arrived first, clutching a stack of letters. The family with the ramp came next, parents holding hands, determination in their eyes. Even Mark showed up, still nervous but stronger than before, his statement in hand. We sat around a weathered picnic table, the afternoon sun slanting through the trees, as I laid out the plan. We need to go public with this, I said quietly. We show them the timeline, the proof, the pattern. If the board tries to silence us, we make sure the city inspector and Officer Yu see everything. My voice felt steadier than it had in weeks. They're counting on fear to keep us quiet. But if we stand together, we can break there. Oh, hold. There were nods, murmurs of agreement. Mrs. Ferguson patted my hand, her voice trembling. It's about time someone did. Mark promised he'd be there, ready to speak if called. The group agreed to stand with me at the next meeting, each prepared to tell their story or submit written statements. Back home, Maria helped me rehearse my presentation, making sure every fact was clear and every piece of evidence accounted for. Keep it simple, she reminded me. Show them the truth. Don't let Patricia twist it. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, running through every possible scenario, every angle the board might take to discredit me, Mark, or our neighbors. But the fear that had gripped me for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. I was no longer fighting alone. This was bigger than one truck, one rule, or one bully with a clipboard. It was about reclaiming the dignity of an entire society. The plan was set. All that remained was to carry it out, publicly and without compromise. Morning sunlight crept across the kitchen table, catching the glint of Mariah's wedding ring as she sorted our growing stack of evidence. I moved quietly, setting out coffee, then double-checking the digital binder. 3 copies, triple backed up, every file labeled, every timeline precise. The sense of mission had burned away the last traces of fear. I wasn't pacing or checking the driveway for Patricia's car anymore. Now, every move felt deliberate, each step a piece of a bigger, unbreakable pattern. Maria squeezed my hand before she left for work. Stick to the facts, Danny. Don't let them bait you. She paused at the door, glancing back. Remember, Mark's risking a lot for this too. I nodded, already planning how I'd position him at the meeting so he wouldn't be cornered. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Mrs. Ferguson was already watering her garden, nodding when she saw me. Her presence reminded me what was at stake, not just my family's legacy, but the right for everyone here to live without intimidation. My first stop was the mailbox pavilion. I needed to speak with a few neighbors who had agreed to add their stories to our file. One by one, they appeared, clutching old warning notices, phone screenshots, even a faded HOA newsletter the HOA enforcer had sent as warning. I took each piece, adding them to a folder labeled Community Impact. Each story was a puzzle piece, isolated, easy to dismiss, but together, undeniable. Back home, I set up my laptop and printed a set of timeline charts, incidents by date, by household, even color-coded to show how Patricia's pattern of enforcement seemed to follow personal grudges. The evidence of bias was clear: a spike in letters around the holidays, a cluster of threats after neighborhood events, every abandoned vehicle complaint tied to a house she'd publicly criticized. It was more than overreach. It was a campaign. Maria reviewed my charts that evening, her smile grim. No one can ignore this now. Around noon, he texted, "Need to meet." Before the board, I agreed to a quick walk by the society pond, a public place where no one would think to eavesdrop. He arrived, nervous as always, but with a new sense of resolve. "I've got your back tonight," he said, "and if it comes to it, I'll go on record about the HOA enforcer's instructions to me. My statement's already in your inbox." I thanked him, feeling the knot in my chest loosen a little more. "After this, I'm done letting them push me around," Mark added, voice shaking with equal parts anxiety and relief. By late afternoon, my presentation was a living thing. Charts, testimonials, photos, the security footage queued up and ready. Maria insisted I practice in front of her, timing each section. "Don't get bogged down," she warned, "and if she interrupts, just keep your eyes on Officer Yu." We rehearsed possible interruptions, mock board questions, even the likely attempts to question his motives. Every answer was measured, factual, but always looped back to the pattern of abuse and the community's fear. With the file complete, I emailed a copy to Officer Yu, adding a note. Evidence for tonight's hearing includes timeline, video, multiple resident statements. He signed testimony. I texted Mrs. Ferguson, confirming she'd sit near the front, ready to speak if needed. The young dad with the ramp story would be there too, his toddler in tow as a reminder of why these fights mattered. As dusk fell, the neighborhood felt different. Doors were open, lights on, voices low but determined. I walked the block one last time, binder in hand, stopping to check in with anyone who'd contributed evidence. Their words were simple but heavy. "We're with you. Don't let them win. This is bigger than just your vehicle." Back at home, I zipped the binder and slipped in Maria's printout of Mark's statement. Everything was set. The evidence, the witnesses, even the questions I'd ask if given the floor. I looked at myself in the mirror, shirt pressed, jaw set. This was it. Months of intimidation and silence were about to meet the facts in the open. As I stepped outside into the cool night, Maria caught my arm and squeezed. "Make them listen, Danny." Her confidence steadied me as I walked toward the meeting that would decide not just the future of my father's Chevy, but of Lakeshore Pines itself. I could feel the electricity in the air as I walked to the clubhouse, binder in hand, every step fueled by a steady, cold fire. For the first time, I didn't worry about who was watching. Neighbors stood on their porches or lingered at the mailbox, nodding encouragement or calling quiet words of support. Even those who'd never spoken up before gave small gestures. A thumbs up, a clenched jaw, a determined stare, as if my battle had become theirs. I paused at the edge of the lot, the old Chevy visible under the streetlight, the little firefighter badge winking from the visor. "Tonight, Dad," I murmured, "we get our say." The clubhouse was packed. The folding chairs, usually half empty, were filled to the walls. Families, older couples, teenagers, even a few people I'd never seen at a meeting. At the front, the board sat behind their table, papers stacked in neat piles, tension crackling between them. The woman with the badge wore her authority like armor, lips set in a thin line, clipboard clutched in white-knuckled hands. Sonia glanced up, gave me a quick nod of encouragement, then returned to her notes. Officer Yu stood near the entrance, uniform crisp, notepad ready. Her presence was a silent warning. No one would sweep this under the rug. Mark arrived just behind me, eyes forward, shoulders square. He took a seat near the front, every line in his face set with resolve. Maria slipped into the chair beside me, her touch grounding me as the hum of conversation faded to silence. Sonia called the meeting to order, her voice steadier than usual. Tonight's agenda: review of code enforcement conduct, vehicle removal request, resident complaints. She looked directly at Patricia, who stiffened, her gaze sweeping the room in search of allies. But the crowd wasn't with her tonight. The silence was heavy, charged with the sense that something bigger than a single dispute was about to break. Patricia led with her usual tactics, repeating claims of society risk, citing ambiguous rules, hinting at danger if the board didn't act. She gestured toward the evidence table, her words brittle, her authority worn thin. I let her finish. Then, with my binder in hand, I stood, locking eyes with Sonia and Officer Yu. I started with the timeline, showing the pattern of complaints, the evidence of selective enforcement, the mounting fear among residents. Each chart, each photo, each statement built on the last, painting a picture of not just abuse of power, but deliberate intimidation. I presented Mark's testimony, highlighting how he'd been instructed to stand down, and shared the video clips that prove Patricia's false claims. At key moments, I paused, letting the weight of the facts hang in the air. I could see faces in the crowd shifting, anger, disbelief, relief as the truth took shape. Maria squeezed my hand every time I faltered, her eyes shining with pride. Officer Yu confirmed the receipt and review of my evidence, stating clearly that the police had found no grounds for Patricia's accusations against me, and that her unauthorized entry and false report were under official review. Her words landed like thunderbolts. Her mask slipped for the first time, her composure faltering as whispers swept through the room. But I didn't stop there. I called on Mrs. Ferguson, who stood and spoke quietly about the fear she'd lived with since her warnings began. The young dad told his story, voice strong despite trembling hands. One by one, residents shared their experiences, each testimony another crack in the board's facade. Sonia watched closely, her usual detachment gone. Even the board members exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the old way of doing things couldn't survive the light of truth. He sat straighter, no longer the nervous contractor, but a man willing to take a stand. By the end of the hour, the room felt transformed. Neighbors looked at each other differently, less like strangers, more like allies. The board huddled, whispering intense debate, the power they'd clung to slipping away with every word. Officer Yu's presence made it clear. This was no longer just an HOA dispute. It was a reckoning. As the meeting closed, Sonia announced, "The board will review all evidence and issue a decision tonight. Residents are encouraged to remain. We will hear every voice for the first time." Patricia looked uncertain, the weight of society turning against her. I sat down, heart pounding, knowing I'd done everything possible. The facts were on the table, the crowd awake, the board finally held accountable. Win or lose, Lakeshore Pines would never be the same. The board huddled in the corner, hushed voices rising and falling as the room buzzed with anticipation. Nobody left, not a single neighbor, not even the ones who usually ducked out early. I sat at the edge of my seat, Maria's hand wrapped around mine, both of us tense, listening for the first sign of the board's decision. Across the room, Patricia scribbled furiously on her clipboard, jaw clenched, sweat beading at her hairline. Sonia shuffled papers, her composure cracking as whispers rippled through the crowd. Officer Yu stood in the back, arms folded, her presence a silent reminder that the law, for once, wasn't on Patricia's side. Reed caught my eye and nodded, a silent message. We'd done all we could. The residents' voices had filled the air, their stories echoing in the charged silence that now gripped the room. Every eye flicked between the board and her, waiting for a final reckoning. When Sonia finally rose, the room fell dead quiet, not even a chair squeaking or a phone buzzing to break the tension. "We've heard testimony from all parties," Sonia began, her voice trembling just slightly. "We've reviewed evidence, video, written statements, photographs, and we've received confirmation from Officer Yu that an investigation into enforcement conduct is underway." Her eyes scanned the crowd, settling on me, then Mrs. Ferguson, then Mark. "Our decision, by majority vote, is as follows." Her eyes darted, panic threatening to break through her mask of confidence. Sonia continued, The removal order for Daniel Rivera's vehicle is rescinded, effective immediately. There is no evidence to support claims of abandonment or threats. Furthermore, this board acknowledges the pattern of selective enforcement and will immediately suspend code enforcement activities pending a third-party review. A collective sigh rushed through the crowd, relief and disbelief blending into a rising hum. But Sonia wasn't finished. Additionally, a resident oversight committee will be established. Any board member, including code enforcement, may be subject to recall by a majority resident vote at any time. Effective tonight. Her gaze landed on Patricia, whose face was frozen between outrage and shock. A beat of silence, and then Mrs. Ferguson stood up, shaky but determined. "It's about time." She looked around the room, voice quivering with both relief and anger. "For years, we let fear decide for us. Tonight, we decided for ourselves." The young dad with the toddler raised a fist, others clapped, and suddenly the room was alive. Old-timers shook hands. Teenagers who'd watched from the back stepped forward to thank Mark, whose relief showed in his trembling smile. Patricia tried to speak, but her words faltered. The room no longer belonged to her. Officer Yu stepped forward, her voice carrying an authority that cut through the commotion. "This matter is still under review by the local police. Any allegations of false reports or unlawful entry will be pursued in accordance with the law." It was the final blow. The HOA enforcer head bowed, her hands white-knuckled around her clipboard. Maria squeezed my hand. "You did it," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "For all of us." I stood, binder in hand, heart thumping with adrenaline and pride. "This wasn't just about my dad's truck," I said, voice stronger than I expected. "It was about making sure no one in this society feels alone again." I turned to the crowd. If you've ever felt bullied, threatened, or silenced by rules that don't make sense, know that you don't have to accept it. There's power in truth, and even more in standing together. The applause was instant and overwhelming, rolling through the room in waves. Neighbors crowded around, some shaking my hand, others offering hugs, a few wiping away tears they didn't bother to hide. He clapped me on the back. Mrs. Ferguson squeezed my shoulder, gratitude shining in her eyes. Officer Yu lingered near the door as people filed out, her nod of respect unspoken but deeply felt. Maria and I walked into the cool night, the weight of months finally lifting from my shoulders. For the first time since my father's vehicle had been threatened, Lakeshore Pines felt like home again, a place shaped by the people who loved it, not by the fear of those who tried to control it. The clubhouse emptied slowly, the echo of voices and footsteps fading into the soft hum of night outside. Maria stayed by my side as we made our way home, arms linked, the binder of evidence tucked under my arm. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The porch lights of Lakeshore Pines burned us a little brighter, and neighbors lingered on sidewalks, trading stories with a kind of cautious hope. Mark stood under the old oak near the entrance, his face tired but relieved. He gave me a nod, more genuine than any words, then turned to join a cluster of residents already talking about the new oversight committee. Inside, I set the binder on the table and exhaled, the adrenaline leaving me shaky. Maria hugged me tight, her warmth anchoring me to the moment. "It's over," she whispered. "You made it." I shook my head, not out of doubt, but in quiet wonder. We all did. Through the window, I watched Mrs. Ferguson stroll past with her husband, laughing for the first time in ages. Kids darted down the street, freed from the tension that had hovered for too long. I thought about my father's Chevy, parked exactly where it belonged. The little firefighter badge still hung from the visor, a silent testament to everything we'd fought for. I pressed my palm to the glass, grounding myself in the memory of his steady hands and quiet courage. In that moment, the truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was a legacy. And tonight, that legacy had been defended. Not just for me, but for every neighbor who'd ever felt powerless. My phone buzzed with messages, thanks, relief, shared memories. Mark texted, "Never thought I'd speak up, but you made it possible." Mrs. Ferguson sent a photo of her roses, captioned, "No more orange tags." The group chat for the new oversight committee pinged to life, people volunteering for roles and proposing reforms. Lakeshore Pines was awake in a way it hadn't been in years. Maria and I sat on the front steps, watching the quiet unfold. She rested her head on my shoulder, her voice gentle. "Do you think they'll really change?" I nodded, feeling hope take root. "I think they already have. The fear's broken." The crickets sang and a breeze stirred the maple tree, leaves rustling like applause. The neighborhood felt lighter, as if a storm had passed and the sun was breaking through for the first time in too long. A letter arrived 2 days later. The woman with the badge had resigned from the board. Sonia's tone was lighter in her announcement, firm but free. Officer Yu's formal report followed, confirming that Patricia's actions were under official investigation. Reed was named as the first resident member of the Oversight Committee. Change, real and lasting, was already underway. For weeks afterward, the mood in Lakeshore Pines was transformed. People who used to nod and hurry inside now waved, lingered, and talked. Neighbors started projects together, planting gardens, building ramps, repainting mailboxes, no longer worried about sudden retaliation or arbitrary rules. Kids chalked the sidewalks with bright colors, and someone even set up a free library box on the corner, stuffed with books and old photos. I made sure to take care of my dad's Chevy, waxed the hood, polished the badge, even fixed the little plastic firefighter that had rattled loose during the chaos. Every time I passed by, I paused to remember. Some victories were measured in inches and moments, others in laughter and shared burdens. Maria would catch me smiling, shake her head, and say, "That truck's never looked better." The story of that board meeting spread through the county, inspiring homeowners from nearby communities to reach out and ask how we'd done it. I found myself answering questions, sharing advice, and reminding everyone who called that the first step was always the hardest, standing up. Reed even went on local radio, sharing what it meant to finally speak his mind. "You're never as alone as you think," he told them. "Sometimes it just takes one person willing to risk the first word." Sometimes I still wake up, expecting to see another violation letter or catch a glimpse of Patricia's white sedan. But the fear doesn't have the same hold anymore. Now, when I look out the window, I see a neighbor's, imperfect but trying, a place where people finally look out for one another. And I know, deep down, that the legacy my father left is safe. Not just the vehicle, but the spirit of standing tall, even when it's hard. If this fight echoes your own, tell us your story below, because someone out there needs to know they're not alone. And if you want to be part of every new battle, subscribe and join the community.